Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I want to talk about the Viking slave trade. Okay, that's something that is not discussed too often, and I find it extremely interesting, especially within the context of gun rights. Okay, the Vikings were basically the Scandinavians, okay, northern part of Europe, and what they did is they raided to the south, primarily northern France, Europe, Ireland. They primarily raided the villages, okay, and what they did is they took they took these villagers, these peasants, and they kidnapped them and took them down to the south, to Muslim-controlled Spain and northern Africa, and they sold them there. Okay, and the Vikings were very successful slave traders. And one of the things I admire about the Vikings is their motto was, if you were strong, they traded with you. If you were weak, they enslaved you. Okay, and a lot of times when we think of the Vikings, we think of them as raiding for gold, and they did do that. They did raid the monasteries for gold, but there was only so much gold to be had, during the Dark Ages. So their primary business was the slave trade. Okay, now. What I want to do is I want to dig into that a little bit, and how did this come about? How were the Vikings able to accomplish this? First of all, the word Viking is a verb in reality. Okay, one was not a Viking, one went Viking. Okay, so Viking is an action word, and it basically means robbing, raping, looting, that kind of stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to use it as a noun because that's how everybody else uses it. So we're going to refer to the Vikings as a group of people from Scandinavia. They were typically of the poor class. Okay, so these weren't like the rich, land barons. These were poor people. So how was one group of poor people able to raid another group of poor people in Europe? Okay, so you got Scandinavian poor people raiding the European poor people. How did they have this huge advantage that they were able to overwhelm them? Well, in Scandinavian culture, all men were trained from the time that they were children to use weapons, swords, knives, axes, shields. So they were trained in the use of arms. In European culture, okay, where you have all the people, 95% of the population in Europe is peasants. And what they are is basically they're serfs, and what serfs are, they're basically slaves. They're tied to the land. Okay, so you don't have a slave trade in Europe in the sense of you're buying and selling slaves, but you really didn't need to buy and sell slaves since if you were a land baron, right, you had land. The land and all the people on it were basically yours to do with as you wish. So there was no need to buy slaves. Since you already had slaves, and the landlord was he was the law. He could work the people to death if he wanted to. Okay, so one of the ways that the land barons in Europe controlled the serf population is they prohibited them from owning and learning to use weapons for self-defense. Because they figured that, hey, if these peasants have swords, eventually they're gonna want to fight us for their freedom. So European peasants were prohibited from owning and training with different arms. So when the Vikings raided Europe, right, northern Europe, what they found was they found that these villages were unarmed, untrained, basically easy pickings. Okay, and unarmed people are very easy to turn into slaves. And what happened was with each successful Viking raid, basically that brought more Viking raids, because then those Vikings would go back home and say, hey, we made so much money, selling these stupid European slaves down to Africa, that basically that would bring the next group of Vikings behind that. So that went on for about 300 years. Okay, so the lesson to be learned out of this is that the best way to enslave people is to keep them unarmed and untrained. Another lesson to be learned from this is that, while the Vikings were raiding the villages and taking slaves, okay, the land barons, they were perfectly safe in their castles. Okay, the land barons in this case, if we were to make a modern day analogy, represent the politicians and law enforcement. Okay, because we all saw what happened with Hurricane Katrina, right? When things got really bad, the police left town. Okay, they left the people to to fend for themselves. So that's exactly what happened during the Viking raids. When the Vikings came in to raid, the local law enforcement, which consisted of the barons and their knights, they were locked up in their in their castles, making sure that nothing bad happened to them. So that is the history behind the Viking raids, and I invite you guys to basically research that a little bit more, because it is very relative. It's very relevant to modern day gun rights. Thanks for watching. I see you guys next time.